Thank you for tuning in to the Astrological Commission podcast. This is your host, Issachar Bey, and I'm here with another great astrologer. Listen, I want you guys, if you can, if you're listening in, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel and to our podcast as we continue to bring you great interviews, great insight. This is another one for me, one of my personal favorites. This gentleman, as you know, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and being part of NCGR, going to Michael Luton's, going to Shelley Ackerman's, just being a part of the astrological community years and years ago. I used to pick up the Dell Horoscope, and in the Dell Horoscope, they used to have these stock tips of different stocks and different astrological sort of like predictions and insight. And I thought it was phenomenal. Even Dave, the Astrological of America, he would tell me a lot of things about this gentleman and, how he really admired him. And so for many years, I've studied his work, studied him. Also, me being a Uranian, studying with Arlene Kramer, I've always felt that, us Uranians have a special gift, a different insight than everybody else. So I've always felt connected to him. But I want to welcome you to him and him to you all. Thank you, guys. Please welcome our very special guest today, Mr. Bill Meridian. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Issachar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bill, could you tell us, just from the beginning, how did you get introduced to astrology? What was your introduction, and how did you get connected to astrology?
Well, that was back, I got out of graduate school in 1972, and I had written on my final exam for security analysis that the way to measure the market was figure out a way to detect the irrational emotional waves that ran through the market. And my professor called me in, and he said, "That's the same thing I found," and he shook my hand and said, "Best paper in the class." So that same year, I joined the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, and they had an offshoot group in New York called Society for the Investigation of Recurring Events. I used to go to their meetings. I met a lot of people who studied cycles. And unlike the way they do it today, and I've sat through my friends' PhD classes here in Vienna, I've been to my alma mater, NYU, Rutgers, Stevens, Princeton. You have to have a logical reason and start from there, and you have to build events, and rather than just knowing if there's a Neptune return in the country, it's going to have a certain effect. And I noticed that the founder of the foundation, Ed Dewey, had isolated stock market cycles, 18.6, 9.3, 3.8 years. And I said, well, I studied astronomy as a boy. I knew those were lunar node cycles and half a lunar node cycle and a double Mars cycle. And I wondered if there could be any connection between this and planets in space. And I started to take astrology lessons. I still lived in New Jersey, 72 to 74. And then I moved into New York, and I started to study with John Townley and Charles Jane. And I also, at Sire, met a man named John Nelson. John Nelson lived in New Jersey. He wrote a book called, I think it's Cosmic Patterns. And he was hired by the RCA Corporation in 1949, the year I was born, to detect what interfered with shortwave radio transmissions, because there were no satellites then. And John got a telescope, got up on top of a building on Wall Street, and he took the inner planets, and he thought gravitational pull had something to do with it, and that effort failed until he opened it up to include the outer planets out through Pluto. And his work was heliocentric, and he showed when there were certain patterns, which we would call aspects or harmonics, planetary pictures, midpoints, that there was an effect on the sun. The sun would erupt. And the sun's eruptions disturb the magnetic field on the Earth. And so 1974, I think I started studying core energetic therapy with Dr. John Parakos, who had been a student of Wilhelm Reich. He and Alexander Lowen developed bioenergetics, which is a whole other story. And I said, Dr. John, I had read about serotonin, which is a substance in the brain. And he said in his Greek accent, yes, I think it's very important, but we really don't know everything about it yet. Well, today, most of the biotechnology for companies work on that. It's a regulator of the body. Serotonin is directly affected by the magnetic field of the Earth. The magnetic field of the Earth is affected by the solar activity. And so I put two and two together. I said, that's got to be the connection. And many years later, I was to find out that serotonin is the substance in the brains of homing pigeons that enable them to home in on the magnetic fields of the Earth and find their locations, or their destinations, I should say. And so this was all very logical to me. And that is how it got started. And I started there were no computers then, there was no software. I started doing this on paper. And then I was working at the Value Line Investment Survey, and I was responsible for the fundamental analysis of 40 companies. And I wondered if there could be anything, at that time I was taking basic lessons, and I met someone who's still a friend of mine, Judith Ora Ryan from New Jersey, a very good professional astrologer. She took one look at my chart, and I had just started studying. And she said, I'll tell you one thing, you'll never inherit anything. I said, well, that's ridiculous. My father was worth about $20 million in the 60s. My father lost everything. My father, my brother, and I all have Saturn in the 8th house. And so I was impressed by the prediction and depressed by the result. But I started to study very much in earnest. And of course, when you sit down with Charles Jane for the first time, you're totally blown away. And with John Townley, he's a good hands-on practical astrologer, how to counsel people. So it was a great combination. And around 77, I was working at Value Line. So I called up the state of Delaware. Now, 70% of all companies in the United States listed on the stock exchange are incorporated in Delaware due to favorable tax treatment. This is a business for the state of Delaware. And it is the Hall of Corporate Records and the Secretary of State's office. So I called them up, I made an appointment, and I took a very early morning bus. I got there as the sun rose at 8 a.m., and they had prepared material on a bunch of companies for me. And I opened it up, and there's a huge, just visualize the huge manila folder, and you open it up, and on the inside left cover is the certificate of long form of good standing. And there is every action that company has taken with a date and an exact time. And so I questioned the lady who did all of this stuff, and she said, well, I said, how does this work? And she said, well, I come in around 9, and I might have, let's say, half a dozen companies that are newly incorporated, and I look at their folders, and I make sure everything's in order and all the proper paperwork is there. Then she pulls out a stamp, and she stamps it with the date and the time. So she may do like 6 in a row at 10 a.m. That's where the time comes from. So I said at 9:59, I couldn't have sued the company because the company didn't exist yet. Is that correct? And she said, yes. So that got me into horoscopes of incorporation, and I was able to get these charts for about 3/4 of the companies that I followed. And as a junior analyst at Value Line, you don't get measured or evaluated by how accurate your stock market calls are. It's the earnings accuracy. And so how much astrology could I know after 5 years? So the charts to me were either bullish, bearish, or most of the time indifferent. In other words, if there was nothing happening in the chart of any substance, I presumed the earnings trend would remain the same as it had been for the previous 5 years. But if it was afflicted, like if you had a bunch of planets in Aquarius and Saturn was going into Aquarius, I would scale my earnings estimates down a bit. Now, if it was very well aspected, I scaled my earnings estimates up. The senior guy said to me, there's not one quarter that you've been here in which you haven't substantially exceeded your accuracy index. Well, I was using the charts of incorporation to do that. And so then I began to notice some of the stocks moved and there was not much happening in the chart. And Charles Jane said, well, young man, in any mundane chart, which a corporation chart is, the moon and the midheaven reflect the people, the public. And so I started calling the New York Stock Exchange and finding out when companies listed on the exchange. And in those days, the started trading at 10. And so I called up and they gave me a few, and that got me started. And I realized that the price changes in the stock were more related to the first trade chart, whereas the fundamental operations of the company were more reflected in the incorporation chart. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
Oh, that's great. I want to stay right there. So at this point, you begin to now use the charts that have reported to the New York Stock Exchange instead of the incorporation chart?
Yes. Well, let me see. It's the research area at the New York Stock Exchange maintains all this data, and I had always worked for companies that were member firms. So I called up, and there were two very nice professional guys. I remember the names were Rich and Hugh, and I would get one or the other, and I said, "Would you mind giving this to me?" They said, "No." I said, "Well, look," I said, "I'm here, with such and such company, and I'd like to get a lot of these. I don't want to burden you. Can I come up there and look through the files myself?" They said, "No." And I said, "Well, when would it be convenient for me to call you?" And I said, "Well, middle of the week, after 4 o'clock. Do you mind if I ask you for 10?" And they said, "No, not at all." And so after 3 years, I had 800 charts that I got directly from the exchange. And as for the time, I set it to the opening of the exchange, which until September of 85 was 10 a.m. Since then, it's 9:30 a.m. And, then I was at Payne Weber 85 to 88. And there it was a good experience. I tried to get, I had been a fundamental analyst. I had combined both, and there was purely a technical market analyst at Payne Weber. There were two of us. And I had a folder with about 800 first trade charts starting at A and running to Z. And there were 3,500 brokers in the U.S. and 1,500 in Europe that could call us. By the time the week ended, those charts were out of order, folded, torn, dog-eared, and I have to put them all back in order. And then software was developed that enabled me to scan through all the charts, which was a blessing. So if you wanted to know if Jupiter is entering Gemini, you would want to know which companies have planets in early Gemini. And I'm just leaning toward the computer, and I'll just give you a quick example because the companies are reporting earnings right now, and that is what I've been doing all day. And I am going to just give you a quick example. You've heard of Palo Alto Networks.
Yes.
They started trading July 20th, 2012. And they have Jupiter at 8 Gemini 12 and the midheaven at 8 Gemini 55. What's headed toward that degree? Jupiter. And so I believe Jupiter will be conjunct, and I can find out just by flipping a few. You couldn't do this years ago. It was all done by hand, which is why not much work got done. They will report, I believe, in the last week of May. And as soon as I get the answer, I'll tell you. I'm almost sure Jupiter is up there at that time.
This is absolutely amazing.
A little time.
I feel like a kid in a candy store.
Well, let me just give you the result, because I think the listeners want to hear this. They report, I think, in the last week of May, if I remember correctly. And let's see, Venus will be on the midheaven May 3rd, or was it June? No, I think it's the end of June. And at the end of June, Jupiter is conjunct Jupiter June 30th. And it would have to be on the midheaven around the same time. And it's also, I think, sextile Uranus. So anyway, that's the earnings surprise method. You just look at the chart for when earnings are reported. Earnings are reported almost every day, but most companies
Hello?
an announcement, and we saw Saturn square the midheaven. Gee, I wonder what he's going to tell us. And well, Saturn square the midheaven, it's probably not very cheery news. It's a news of a cutback or a reduction. So that's the earnings surprise method, because the Financial Analyst Journal has many, many articles by PhDs that show that earnings get most volatile, or stock prices get most volatile around earnings time, because, of course, some of the earnings estimates are going to be right on, and the stock doesn't move very much. Some of them Value Line Investment Survey has proven that if the earnings are more than one standard deviation from the Wall Street median, the stock will move sharply in one direction or the other. So if you think earnings are going to be $1 a share and they come in at 80 cents, the stock is probably going to drop. But what always makes me laugh is sometimes I have a very afflicted chart and the earnings come out better than estimates and the stock drops and everybody wonders why. And other times, it's really amusing to listen to people on the business and the business media, or the chart is very well aspected, and the earnings come in below estimates, and the stock rises anyway. And and what they'll say is, I guess investors are looking across the valley to when things improve. That's why they're buying it now. No, it's the activity when they report earnings.
Yeah. This is phenomenal. How did you get involved in Uranian? How did Uranian come about?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I also, for tomorrow, I just made a short sale on UAL, United Airlines, because if you take the converse progress chart, you'll find the midheaven and Saturn are almost exactly conjunct, and transiting Mars is 45 degrees from that today and tomorrow, and they report in the morning. So that's UAL, United Airlines. The Uranian system, I went to New York and try to imagine you're coming from New Jersey, and you sit down in class, and around me is Arlene Nymark, Diana Rosenberg. Arlene did Uranian, Diana did Uranian and Fixed Stars, Dr. Lee Lehman. Who else? Well, as Al Morrison, the teacher, and Charles Emerson, he had Uranian classes, and my other friends' names I can't think of. But they had the computerized Neil Mickelson astrocomputing charts. And I said, where did you get those? And they said, Neil Mickelson. It's, how much are they? How do I get one? And I said, wait just a minute. What are all these other planets in the chart? And they said, well, those are the Uranian planets. And I, please explain. And they explained it to me. And what are all these other things? Well, those are the asteroids. And Eleanor Bach had developed those, and she lived in Soho. No, she lived in Chelsea. And so I started going to her classes, and I started studying Uranian with Charles Emerson, Dr. Edgar Wagner, Hans Nigerman. I wasn't his student, but I used to talk to him at conferences, Gary Kristen, Wayne Buher, and Diana Rosenberg, and Arlene Nymark and myself were Uranian fanatics. We used to meet in the coffee houses, the cafes in Greenwich Village, and yak about planets. And I'm leaving somebody out whom I still meet with, and I can visualize her, but I can't think of her name. We still talk about Uranian planets. And there was a conference, and there was trying to think of his name. It might come to me sooner or later. A black gentleman who was very well-spoken, very handsome guy. And he said, he presented the Uranian planets, and he said, look at this, Apollon is the planet of peace.
We can't hear you, Bill. You went out.
They would say something that was very, I had their charts, and I would look at their charts. I said, well, these Uranian planets are really a major part of one's personality. And I was studying asteroids with Eleanor Bach, the same thing right there. And, I have a 27 Libra midheaven, and Cupido was transiting over it. Number one, I joined this group. Number two, I was in the insurance industry, and I was responsible for organizing these committees, groups, and meetings and things like that. And I was the hospitality chairman of NCGR in New York. At no other time in my life, other than when Cupido went over my midheaven, did I do things like that. I actually went to one wedding where 6 couples got married in one day, in a spiritual ceremony in upstate New York. Cupido is matrimony, it's organizations, clubs, groups, and I don't have a good one natally, but when it went over my midheaven, I did all those things. And so I still use it today, and I think part of the reason why people haven't embraced it is if you can interpret, like you can interpret Saturn as Liz Green does, then you understand Saturn as a process, and all of the keywords make sense. And so Cupido, groups, marriages, and it's the urge to merge. That's the most basic thing I can tell you. If Cupido hits your chart, you get lonely, or you feel like you want to be with friends, or you join a group. If Hades hits your chart, then very deep, ugly feelings can come up. But the reverse happens with Kronos, and I've watched these in my chart and other people's charts over the years. And Vulcan, forge your fate. So a friend of mine is a sculptor. I said, Vulcanus got strong in her chart. I said, by the way, dear, I said, what happened in this year with your artwork? Well, I shifted mediums. I said, well, how so? I shifted from, what do you call that plastic material you can cast into statues and stuff? Forgot the name of it. But she said, I switched to bronze. And there's pictures of her like in a blast furnace suit, that looks like a spacesuit, and she's pouring molten metal into a form. And this is Vulcanus, the forges of fate. And by the way, the young gentleman was Michael Dubois. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened. He died at a very early age, but he really inspired me to study the Uranian system.
Very good, very good. And how after?
So does that answer your question?
Oh, definitely, yes. After learning about,
hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Have I lost you?
I'm here, sir. Can you hear us? We can hear you.
I don't know. I cannot hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I see we're still connected.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Low in the car. I don't think you can hear me.
I can hear you, sir.
How about sending me an email?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, I couldn't hear you. So I didn't know. Well, that's how I got into the Uranian system.
Okay.
Would you like me to continue, or do you have a question?
Can you hear me? Wow. Let's see.
Okay, well, I'll just continue a little bit further. I completed that training in about 9 years, and the reason I stuck with them for so long was that John Paracco's wife was Eva Brock, who was a medium who would go into trance. She was from Vienna, in fact. And he would take her spiritual teachings and tell us, he would bring it down to earth. He said, look, if you're having these problems in your life, you're violating the spiritual principle. Here's how to work with people. And I'm looking at the horoscopes. And that group, after Eva died, sort of broke up a bit. And I went on then to a monastery where I studied with a Zen master, 83 through, well, I left the United States in 90, so I was not that connected anymore. And unfortunately, he died about 20 years ago this year. And so he had actually studied, the Zen master had studied with Hans Nigemann. He had studied Uranian astrology. And he used to call me over and he'd say, Bill, Admetus. You know Admetus? I says, yeah. And he pointed to one student who was very good at sitting in meditation, not moving. He's strong Admetus. And so we used to share these little tidbits. And then I got involved with Del Horoscope. Charles Jane had did an enormous amount of work with eclipses. And he said that he had written for Del Horoscope, And I went up to Dell, and Ronnie Grishman and the folks up there were very kind to me. I said, "Do you have a library?" Well, they sure did. They had every issue from 1935 to 75 bound in hardcover copy, and I could read every one of them. I started subscribing in 75. So, and in 1939 to 40, there was a very good woman. I can't remember her name, but she predicted the outbreak of World War II. And she vanished, and Charles Jane appeared 40 or 41, and he predicted most of the course of the war. And I read all this material, and they were very kind to let me photocopy. I mean, literally a cardboard box, 2 cardboard boxes on 2 visits. And then I called American Astrology, and Ken Irving, unfortunately, he had a listing of all the articles Jane had written. I was able to get those from the library and then from other sources. So I moved from Greenwich Village to Abu Dhabi. I get a letter forwarded to me. "We would like you to write the Dell Horoscope column." And they were very surprised to get a letter from Abu Dhabi. I accepted. The first thing I thought was, I don't have time. But then this little voice that you should always listen to said, "Do it." And of course, the first year's articles were forgettable. And then I had to build up a database of a mundane database to work with, which I describe in my book, Mastering Geopolitical Prediction, which covers all of this material. And of course, you start with Nick Campion's book and then go to those. I have to turn around and look at my bookcase. I then went from there to, Ron Howland wrote one very good book, USA Horoscopes. And then there are Mark Penfield's books. And so I put all of those into a program, into the database, and then I started to research each country individually. And then I put in, that's too much to scan. So I have one file of all the countries of the world and another one of all the leaders plus the day they came to power. That one changes because some of these countries change leaders every 90 days. And so I would take the software and scan. Like we just had an eclipse, was it 19 Aries? So I could scan for all countries and leaders who have, let's say, the sun at 19 Aries or 19 Libra. Because if you have an eclipse conjunct your sun, it makes it a very exceptional year. If it opposes your sun, it's like getting knocked down in a soccer field. And if your birthday is the week before an eclipse, the year works out very unexpectedly. If it's within a week of eclipse but not before, then you have an important year. If your birthday is right on an eclipse, then that's a most fated year. And I wrote that for 30 years. And among the things I remember was I had said I was very interested in Hong Kong and China, and I made some projections, and I said China would make moves toward Hong Kong, but really wouldn't take it over until a certain year. When that year came, I updated it, and I predicted the exact month and the year that Hong Kong was taken over by China. One of my clients is a hedge fund in Hong Kong, and they suddenly increased what they paid me monthly by 66%. So I sent the invoice in, and they said, "No, you got a new contract." And it was because I made that prediction. They had shifted their incorporation to the Cayman Islands and opened up an office in England. And so that's the type of things you can do with mundane astrology. And unfortunately, it's a lot of work to do it. People ask me questions. I really can't answer them because you have to run through the entire database. And I remember there was an eclipse path in 1983 down in right off of South America. Nobody lives there. Nothing happens. Well, it went right through the Falkland Islands. And of course, there was the Argentine Falklands War. And an eclipse path went between Spain and France in the Pyrenees Mountains. And I'm watching 60 Minutes. And it turns out that people crossed the border there in order to save money and avoid taxes. And the government decided to crack down. And it was actually a riot, a big fight, and people were killed. And that eclipse path went right through that narrow band. Now, of course, you wouldn't know that unless you studied what's going on. You might, if you live there, might be able to predict that because you know what the conditions are. And of course, I owe most of this knowledge to Charles Jane because he when he started Indel Horoscope in 40, he was using historical eclipse paths.
Wow, that's great. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. What do you think about this conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus on April 20th? What companies do you think might be affected?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that right at the moment.
Oh yeah, well you can't. I know because
I can tell you,
because of the stock tips and all that. Yeah.
No, I just not at the tip of my tongue at the moment. I haven't gotten that far yet. But it's on the sun in the horoscope of Israel, so that's much better for Israel's leadership and for the country. And in terms of the stock market, from 1885 to the present, there have been 17 such oppositions, and generally, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is just in the middle of a rally. In other words, it's rallying 30 to 60 days before to 30, 60 days after with no major turn. But in the 10-year note, in the U.S. bond called the 10-year note, that's usually a top. And also for gold, it's a temporary high. And for Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions, if I would have known beforehand you were going to ask me that, I would have it ready, but I just don't recall at the moment.
Yeah, so I've always been a big fan of yours. Like I said, reading the Dell horoscope, I've seen you do things about Netflix. I've seen you, it was just so fascinating because I had never seen anybody connect the stocks with astrology. And so I just thought that, and then to find out that you were Uranian, because sometimes you would say, have some Uranian in there. And I was just like, this is unbelievable. This is magnificent. And I just think, and also, like I said earlier, Dave from Astrology of America bookstore in Manhattan, he would always tell me, like, you need to look at Bill Meridian stuff. He has some good stuff on, like you said, the cycles and just, financial astrology and stuff. And then I have a few of your tapes of you speaking at different conferences and so forth over the years. So I've always been fascinated. How does one? Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention one of the things I just cut IBM out of portfolios because they report, I think it is April 24th after the close. Now this is tricky. Jupiter is trying the midheaven that day and Venus is sextile the sun that day, but on the 26th, Saturn is conjunct Uranus. Saturn and Uranus is natal. Saturn moves slower than Jupiter or Venus. And trines and sextiles are pretty weak. But Saturn conjunct Uranus, I'm looking at the IBM chart, February 14, 1924, 10 a.m. Saturn is 16 Pisces. It is square Mars at 16 Sagittarius, which is conjunct Jupiter at 16 Sagittarius, which is opposite the moon at 14 Gemini. And I'm predicting that I'm probably going to sell short or buy puts on IBM as the earnings date approaches, but that was a major degree, like 16 to 18 mutable, because back in the day when digital equipment was around, which it's not, and Lexmark was around, which it's not, all these old companies that were around at the time, they were very hot early on and they got left behind in the technology boom. That is a key degree error. If you put all the charts together, there's no doubt in your mind that that's a key area for the old big tech stocks. So I just wanted to tell you about that.
Oh, okay. Definitely. Thank you so much, man. This is unbelievable. Giving a lot of great insight, which I knew we would. How if somebody's listening right now and they say, you know what, I want to get into studying financial astrology, studying the stock market with astrology, how would you guide them, or where could they go to get started? Where would they need to start studying?
Well, it depends what you want to do. I mean, I bought my first stock in 1966 and I was 17. And most of the stuff that you think works doesn't work. Like I was writing on I was charting them on graph paper and writing down events. And I was saying, wait a minute, if they just raise their dividend and the stock doesn't go up, or bad news comes out, and I said the stock doesn't go down. That's why I started studying this. So I would recommend, in terms of markets, study technical analysis, particularly pattern perception. And the Bible for that is the book by Edwards and McGee. But there are loads of good books that are out. And that's number one. And number two, I always tell people, I said, what is easier? If a client calls you and he says, next Monday at 9 a.m., I'll be in Chicago, and I have a very important meeting. Would you look at my chart? Well, what would you do? You would take the chart for 9 a.m. Chicago and put it around his chart and do a synastry. Well, that's what I do with the first trade charts. That situation is easier than somebody coming to you and saying, forecast my chart for the next 6 months in terms of my business, to have a set specific date. So I think doing the earnings surprise method is the easiest way. Using the transits, progressions, and solar arcs to the first trade chart is the easiest way to get started if you're serious about making money. And of course, at first you paper trade it. And my book, Planetary Stock Trading, has 1,000 charts in it. And I work with Gene Vicutan at astroapp.com out in San Francisco. And we keep we have all the charts. I update the charts every Sunday when I get Barron's, because I need that myself. And so I scan them now. Earnings are coming in. This week is not heavy, but next week you could have like 200, 300 stocks reporting in one day, and it gets fairly hectic. But if I have found out over the years that if I just isolate charts into bullish and bearish, and I put an equal amount in each one, I was right about 65% of the time. I've sort of pushed that up to 70. I've had an exceptionally good run since last October. That's easy. Studying the overall market is something I'm still doing. And of course, we developed AstroAnalyst, the old obsolete DOS program, to do this. And I have software that I've designed myself, which is quantitative and cyclical, which is programmed here in Austria. I have programs by other people that I use. And still, I got the last 2 weeks wrong. I thought, cycles turned down, but I thought the market was strong enough to hold up, and I was dead wrong about that. And so, I've had the advantage when I got interested. It was the late 60s, early 70s. Wall Street was a much smaller place. People were accessible. You could call up somebody and say, hey, I'm interested in the stock market. Oh, okay, kid, I'll take you to lunch. Or, can I come up and, can I be a summer intern? It's not easy anymore at all. And the Market Technicians Association used to sit around and talk in bars, and so they formed a formal organization that is now doesn't have any meetings anymore. They have conferences, and they turned into a diploma mill. So, and the people, who wrote the books, one of the most famous market analysts was George Lindsay. He was on Christopher Street. I was on Waverly Place in Greenwich Village. So I used to go over and have coffee with him. And as I said, people were more accessible. And these days, they have lots of online courses and all. I don't think that's as good as finding somebody like Joe DiNapoli, who is a professional trader, and the late Richard Diamond, whom I studied with, and Frankie Joe. Frankie was one of the greatest traders in the history of modern Wall Street. He started a newsletter, went broke, got mad, and he started a trade. And over 15 years, without having a losing year, he made himself in interstate securities $32 million, starting with his own fund was $600. He had $600. And if I ever got down and out, he said, do you have more than $600 right now? Then you're in better shape than I was when I got started. And I was Frankie's astrologer for about 12 years.
Wow. So when people came to you and say, hey, Bill, what did they come? They ask you, should I invest in this stock? Well, how would they come to you? How would you help the traders?
Well, first of all, I've been trained in core energetic therapy, which has its offshoot from Wilhelm Reich, and Dress for Success, body language, blink, and all these things are all derived from Reichian therapy. And I can just tell you that most of the people who run these places are scared to death of things they don't understand that are out of their control. And if you say to them, I have knowledge of these things that are out of your control, the legs cross, the arms cross, there's a furrow, the person, you can just tell they start cutting off because you're frightening them. And so I do, people's horoscopes. I'm trained as a therapist and an astrologer. What happens is, this one hedge fund, I do overall market forecasting for them. And the guy who runs the U.S. portfolio relies upon me. For example, these examples I just gave you, JB Hunt and now UAL and IBM coming up and maybe Palo Alto in later June, I passed these on to him, and I said they're good for one-day moves. And I will very frequently, call up and I dial up now, and enter the order 10 minutes before the market closes and close the position 1 hour after it opens in the next day. So it's part of my overall stock market service. So I have a monthly letter that goes out to the public, but I have an institutional service because after 13 years in Abu Dhabi, running a portfolio that started at 440 million and ran to 1.3 billion by the end of the decade, they all knew me. And so, I'd sit and have lunch with them. And, when I left Abu Dhabi, I said, you guys know what I do. Would you pay for such a service? And they said, yes. So it's included in there, but I don't bring it up and they don't ask. But some people, it's amazing. Sometimes you're sitting across from a guy in London and his company, was advising him on their portfolio and all this stuff. And Bill, would you look at my horoscope? I nearly fainted. And it turns out he's got an office in Hong Kong and he has a Chinese astrologer. He said, I'd like a Western approach. I said, how do you know I did astrology? And he said, well, people on Wall Street generally know that. So wow. I very aggressively trade my own account because when I left Abu Dhabi 20 years ago, I said, I got a good group of wealthy, heavy hitter institutions, but these guys will retire, the companies will get sold, or maybe I'll be wrong, I'll fall out of favor. And it's gone from 6 down to 1. And I don't go out and market anymore. I said, I'll make up the difference by trading my own account. So that is what I have done. And I'm very aggressive. And I use this earning surprise method. And some of the stocks I own are from last autumn because trying to think of the names. I should know the names should be on the tip of my tongue. Costco had very good first trade chart when they reported earnings last October. I bought it. It popped up. It looked so strong. I've just held it ever since. That's one. And what is the Uber? Uber's another one that's done exceptionally well. Grinder, I added that recently. GRND is the LGBTQ dating website. And that has done exceptionally well because it's a low price stock. And if it moves up from 8 to 10, you've got a 25% return right away. So some of them I only hold on to, like if I'm shorting stocks, then, and it's an up market, I'm not going to hold on to those stocks for long because a lot of fund managers they'll see a stock drop 5%. Oh, this is a chance for me to add more to my portfolio, and they'll push the stock right back up later that day or maybe the next morning. But if you're in a down market, which I think we are in now for the rest of the month at least, and maybe into the next 2 months, I'm putting on more short sales.
And what made you? I'm pretty sure it's in your chart. What made you leave America and just go over to Abu, where you are now in Italy and so forth? Like, what made you leave America and go to other places?
Well, it was very simple. I was at PaineWebber for 3 or 4 years, and I was sort of approaching the end of year 4, and I said, this is a cheap company. That was their reputation. When the downturn comes, they're going to keep my boss and fire me. My boss said, oh, no. And in 87, there was a crash, and I said to him, it's going to take him a year to figure this out. Well, 13 months later, in November of 88, sure enough, I got laid off, but I had already started, number one, creating a program called Astro Analyst, and number 2, started a newsletter called Cycles Research. I couldn't do it under my given name. I started it a year before I got laid off. So I had to make up a pen name. And so Meridian means something to astrologers, but it's neutral to the general public, and it sounds better than Bill Jupiter or Bill Pluto. And so that, I was in business on my own for about, 8 or 10 months, and an Arab man came to see me, and he said, I like what you're doing. And he said, would you like to manage money for me and live in the Middle East? And that was Monday in the Helmsley Palace in Manhattan. Tuesday, I went to my Austrian girlfriend's apartment, and I said, how would you like to be married to a money manager living in the Middle East? We showed up Wednesday, and I said, by the way, Ali, this is my fiancée. And he said, I didn't know you were engaged. And I thought to myself, on Monday night, I wasn't. So I accepted the offer. I went to Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, January of 90. We were there for 13 years. And unfortunately, Ali retired in 98, and I lost in the Arabic word for power is wasta. He was what's known as a wasta man. You couldn't mess with him. And he retired in 98 because he didn't like all the politics. I liked it even less. And then if you don't have a wasta man, you're sort of, spare change in somebody's pocket. And so I saw this occurring. And that's when I started setting up what I'm doing now. I started in 2000. I told everybody the market's headed down hard. I was right. Indicator Digest was an independent service in Connecticut that was run by the guy who's the head of the research area at Payne Weber. He left the year that I joined, and he set this business up, and he ranked people who have small services. And so in 2000, I got in touch and I said, I'd like to be ranked. It's okay. You have to send us your reports for 12 months before we even rank you. Well, I came out bearish and the market collapsed in 2000. So I was ranked number one when I first got listed. And I was ranked number one again in 96. And for the entire 19 years that they covered me, they stopped their operations. Now, I was ranked number 3 of 170 services. And so when I got over there, Ali had told the other people, Bill can do fundamental analysis, he can do technical analysis, and on top of that, he doesn't drink alcohol, which was a big selling point. So that's how we got there. And then my wife being Austrian, we looked around and we said it's easier and cheaper to live here. And her parents were coming down with Alzheimer's, and she's an only child, so she wanted to come here to take care of them. So currently, I live 6 months here, and on May 8th, I leave to go to the U.S. for 6 months, where I live just outside of Princeton in New Jersey.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it has to be great to be able to travel the world and see all those different things and still do what you love, where you can stock and trade no matter where you're at all over the world. That has to be definitely a phenomenal, opportunity.
Well, I'll tell you, I was the technology analyst, and in 91 they said, we see, they gave me $50 million to start with. We see you own mostly technology stocks. We know you've created software. We see you doing all your own work on the PC. The guys doing technology have left. Would you take the portfolio? It's $440 million. And I said, yeah, but I said, I made a deal. I only work with you, Ali. And well, we have to hire a senior fund manager, but don't worry. Well, I have Mars and Hades opposite the midheaven, and none of them got along with me. None of them agreed with it was constant, warfare. So that is how I got over there. That's how we came to Austria. And after 2012, I decided I don't want to be in Austria all the time. I want to be back. And the odd thing is I bought a place in Monroe, New Jersey, and Charles Jane lived in Monroe, New York. We're about on the same degree of longitude, almost to the degree.
Wow. Do you also use the I forgot, it's what Chris McCrae talked about, the maps, the Geno what is it, I can't think of the name of it. Chris McCrae was the one that actually taught it.
The geodetic equivalence?
Geodetic. Do you look at the geodetic equivalence?
Well, I look at everything. I do kitchen sink work. No matter what I do, I look at everything. And I still have them here. I get 11 by 17 maps of the world, and I would draw the geodetic equivalence on there. The planets have latitude. I would draw horizontal bands. It's in orange. I still remember the color. Horizontal bands, and then I would put where the eclipses were on the midheaven and the IC. I would put vertical lines. By the time I was done, it looked like an explosion in a linguine factory, and I had all of these lines on one big map of the world, so I could see. The eclipse paths were, of course, on there, and I could see where the eclipse paths intersected these other lines and where the world action might be. So that's one technique, but I find. I studied astrocartography with Jim Lewis, and I use that a lot. And that in the eclipse paths, you can put I'll give you an example. My wife's eclipse path starts it runs from New York over to just south of Abu Dhabi. So if you draw a line, if you drop a vertical line from the beginning of her eclipse path, which is on the east coast of the United States at New York, where we met, if you drop it straight south, it runs right through Rio de Janeiro, where her first husband proposed to her. And if you go to the other end of the eclipse path and draw a line straight north, it runs right through Abu Dhabi, where we lived. And it intersects her Venus line, Venus on the ascendant. We get there, the phone rings. Hello, this is Wolfgang Lantz. I am the commercial consul, and welcome to Abu Dhabi. We invite you to come over and introduce yourself. And we went over, and they said, we're having Austrian Day here. Do you have any traditional dresses, like a dirndl? And my wife said, of course. So we're there for 4 weeks, and she appears there, and what happens, the photographers come, and on the front page of the second section of the newspaper, which is the social section, there's my wife. So that's Venus on the ascendant, intersecting an extension line from her eclipse path.
Wow.
So it was all Venus for her.
Wow. Hey, Bill, could you tell us, those that are listening, how could they get copies of your books? How could they follow you, get your articles or anything like that?
Yeah, it's billmeridian.com is the website. And if you click on publications, you'll see the books and the newsletter there. And I apologize, it's an ancient website from the days of steam-powered computers, and I'm very remiss on getting that upgraded. It's one of the things I want to do before the end of the year.
Okay, so we would definitely take a look at that. Could you tell us about any upcoming things you have going on, any talks? I know you're going to be doing the Uranian SIG talk pretty soon. But are there any other things that you would like to let us know about that we can definitely keep in contact with and look out for?
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at my book here. I don't remember when exactly that Uranian talk is, but I'm going to try and look it up right now. It's the analysis of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction chart, plus the zero Cancer eclipse that preceded it. That is on May 5th for NCGR. And on May 12th, the Astrological Society of Princeton, I will be reviewing the basics of first trade charts and the stock trading using astrology. So those are the next two.
Oh, definitely. Bill, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Sure. This is phenomenal. We got a whole wealth of information. I'm definitely on cloud nine. I'm definitely going to go ahead and look at some stocks and different things like that. So, we wanted to bring you on to give you your flowers, to tell you thank you, because you have been a great pillar to the astrological community. You have definitely pushed the needle forth many times and times over again. You have been just a beacon of light to this community, and we just want to give you your flowers, and we want to tell you thank you because we appreciate you, and we think that you need to be celebrated. So, we wanted to take this time out to tell you thank you, because you have done great works. And, for me, like I said, coming out of New York, reading the Dell Horoscope, getting your takes from different lectures, and just basically always, hearing your name over and over again, and everybody's talking about, if you want financial astrology, this is where you go. So I think that you need to be celebrated, and that's what we wanted to do today. We got a wealth of information. You've given us so much insight. I'm pretty sure a lot of us will be able to go to your site, order your books, and those like myself who want to get into the financial astrology genre to begin to study. And what better way to let money work for you, and to start getting into the stock market and allowing yourself to make your money work for you, but do it using astrology. I mean, there's no greater way to do it but that way. So, we are definitely excited about that, and we just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you for calling me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.